If it's absolutely necessary, I have no problem taking off my clothes. But I wouldn't just take them off for the purpose of it, since I find it kind of ridiculous how people go on about covering their bodies. It seems like something claustrophobic and somewhat ridiculous to me, with its optimism, sparkling eyes, and a smile as bright as a June morning. The 1960 movie Pollyanna featured a 14-year-old blonde girl. Hollywood proclaimed her the new Disney princess overnight, and her name was Hayley Mills. In just 6 years, she starred in 6 iconic movies, won the Juvenile Oscar, and rose to fame as a global celebrity with The Parent Trap. She embodied childhood not only for a generation, but for a whole cinematic era. However, Mills awakened up to a world that was no longer pure as the spotlight dimmed. She battled an eating issue in secret, lost all of her Disney-era savings to a 91% tax policy, had a startling affair with a married director 32 years her older, and even declined the role of Lolita because of strict control from her parents and Disney. Hayley Mills's story is more than just a sentimental account of a kid star. A little girl had to recover her right to be in charge of her life from the picture that people had constructed of her during this tearful journey of growing up. It is a tale about the cost of celebrity, the realization following delusion, and most importantly, a woman's silent faith in her independence, even at the expense of everything. Born on April 18, 1946, in London, England, Hayley Catherine Rose Vivian Mills came from a conservative family with a strong artistic heritage. One of the best British performers of the 20th century was her father, Sir John Mills. Mary Hayley Bell, her mother, wrote a number of critically acclaimed stage plays in addition to novels and screenplays. Juliet Mills, her older sister, would also become a well-known and admired actress. Hayley was surrounded by movie sets, stage lights, and discussions about directors, lighting, and screenplays from an early age. However, nobody could have predicted that the family's youngest child, a timid young girl with untangled hair, would become well known throughout the world at the age of 12. The chance almost happened by accident. The director of the psychological crime thriller, Tiger Bay, J. Lee Thompson, was looking for a young kid to play the lead in 1959. However, he had a change of heart after meeting Hayley Mills and learning that she was the daughter of John Mills, who is featured in the movie. For a girl, the role was rewritten. Thus, this young performer, who had no formal acting experience, astounded Britain with a performance that was hauntingly intense and filled with deep anxiety. Hayley earned the BAFTA Award for Most Promising Newcomer for her first role, an uncommon accomplishment. However, that was only the start. When Disney producer Bill Anderson happened to see Tiger Bay, he gave Walt Disney the video right away. After being flown to Hollywood to try out for Pollyanna in a matter of months, Hayley Mills was unquestionably selected by Walt Disney, the ultimate dreamer. With a sophisticated innocence and sophistication much above her years in every picture, Hayley transformed from a shy English kid into America's new childhood icon. Her life, however, no longer belonged to her after that. Hayley was unaware that Disney and the public, in addition to her parents, would closely watch everything she did, including her speech, appearance, and haircut. She was no longer able to grow up organically, eat the way she wanted, or choose her roles. Although she was not permitted to have her own identity, she had been selected to become an idol. And that was just the start of an adventure that would be both exhilarating and agonizing. Few actors worldwide can claim to have portrayed a whole generation at one point, and one of the very few is Hayley Mills. The 14-year-old British girl swiftly rose to prominence as the most valuable gem in Walt Disney's treasure trove with the phenomenal success of Pollyanna in 1960. In addition to receiving accolades from reviewers and being loved by viewers, she was also personally guided and shielded by Walt as if she were a spiritual child of the Disney clan. Hayley Mills starred in 6 studio productions between 1960 and 1965. An exhilarating tempo, even for mature actors, much less a teenage lady. However, Hayley did more than simply keep up. With every performance, the crowd became more enamored with her and more certain that she was the epitome of virtue and innocence that a world that was changing quickly could not touch. Her most famous role was in the 1961 movie The Parent Trap, dual roles as Sharon and Susan, twins, sisters who were separated at birth, come together by coincidence and plot to reunite their parents. Hayley produced 2 different identities that were complementary yet differing thanks to special effects and her subtle performance, which let viewers forget that there was only one actress on film. In addition to proving her brilliance, the performance established her as Disney's adolescent queen and was a technological first for the company. She also starred in the non-Disney movie Whistle Down the Wind that year, which marked a sea change in her career. The movie, which is based on a book written by her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, is about a girl who thinks Jesus Christ is a fugitive who is hiding in her family's barn. Hayley displayed emotional depth and acting maturity well above her years in this tender yet powerful story. Critics praised the performance as a significant change for a child star looking to advance, and it garnered her a BAFTA nomination for Best Actress. She adorned magazine covers, was courted by the British and American film industry, and was the top-ranked box office star in the UK by 1961. But a cloud was gathering behind the glittering achievements. Command. She was beloved by Walt Disney. Nobody questioned that. But there were definite limits to that attachment. Disney and her parents had to approve each script that Hayley received. Filming passionate kisses was prohibited for her. Playing characters with psychological complexity is prohibited. Prohibited from deviating from the ideal of the good-natured, polite, happy girl who always thinks positively. Even when one of the most audacious directors of the era, Stanley Kubrick, offered her the lead in Lolita, her father and Disney gave her a clear-cut no. For them, Hayley Mills, the American ideal of a morally upright youth, could hardly have played a part about a seductive adolescent who was coveted by a middle-aged man. She was heartbroken by the rejection. I was devastated. Lolita was a huge artistic opportunity, but at the time, I had no voice, and that was the main problem. She wasn't allowed to own herself, she wrote later in her memoir, Forever Young. Hayley Mills was imprisoned within a cage constructed from her public persona at a time when girls start to realize who they are and what they wish to become. Every action had to be pre-approved, and every grin had to be true to the brand. Ironically, she was not permitted to fail, try new things, or mature. As her Disney contract came to an end in 1965, Hayley Mills found herself in a difficult situation. She was no longer the Pollyanna of the previous year at the age of 19. She yearned to push herself in mature roles that involved sorrow, conflict, and sexuality. However, an adult woman was not what Disney desired. They desired a frozen version of 14-year-old Hayley Mills. She therefore refused to have her contract renewed. She had never really made a choice for herself before. But everything started to fall apart after that: money, romance, profession, and reputation. She even started to lose faith in the people who had previously kept her safe. She had made the decision to mature, but no one had told her that doing so would require her to give up everything. Hayley Mills left the safe haven of Disney at the age of 20, a glass cage that would wait for her until she reached adulthood, where every choice had been made for her. Every contract was handled by attorneys, and every dollar earned was guaranteed. She was unaware, however, that nobody in the actual world fulfills commitments. During her adolescence, the massive salaries she received from Pollyanna, The Parent Trap, and a series of Disney blockbusters were placed in a trust fund that was legally required to be kept safe until she reached 21. For Hayley Mills, it was a given, a just reward for years of hard work as a child. With that money, she hoped to buy a house, live on her own, and pursue fulfilling artistic endeavors. But it was all gone when the time arrived. Hayley Mills sat in her lawyer's office on a fateful morning in 1967, hoping to get the fortune she had earned. Rather, she was hit with a blow for which no one could have prepared her. The British Inland Revenue had taxed her entire income at a startling 91%. 91%, indeed. She remembers it in her memoir, Forever Young. I felt as though I had lost all of my blood. My face turned white. My heart fell. The money wasn't the point. The realization that I had been legally robbed was the shock. Before turning 21, she was unaware that she might have declined the trust, one that would have prevented the debilitating compound tax. However, nobody informed her. Her financial overseer and once well-known actor father had not been aware of the complexities of the law. Hayley claims that her lawyer never gave her advice. As she subsequently explained, the British government was waiting like contemporary pirates to seize her riches when the time came. Hayley Mills persisted and brought a lawsuit. The first case collapsed after dragging on for almost 2 years. She made a plea. A ray of hope appeared in 1972 when renowned Judge Lord Denning decided that Hayley Mills was entitled to her money back because she had already paid her fair share of taxes. It was one of the few occasions when the artist was supported by justice. Hayley was ecstatic, believing she had finally escaped. However, that happiness didn't last for 2 years. The highest court at the time, the House of Lords, reversed the ruling and rejected her petition completely in 1974. Everything returned to zero. An estimated £2 million, or $17 million in today's currency, was lost. However, Hayley Mills lost more than just cash. It was faith, trust in the courts, in the people who had pledged to take care of her, in the same systems of society that led a teenage girl to give her everything without ever being able to choose her own rewards. That financial shock caused her to make compromises in her career. As she noted in her memoir, Dis always said, "Talent is forever. But I learned that it's the contract that lives the longest." She had to take mediocre assignments, frequently low-paying TV gigs, rather than taking on experimental roles, just to make ends meet, raise her child, and preserve her already badly damaged public image. Hayley Mills, from Disney's Golden Girl, had fallen into financial ruin without any fault of her own. She had starred in movies that brought in tens of millions of dollars for the world's largest studio. However, no one was there to support her when she needed it. In her quest to escape the Disney cage, that was only the first heartbreak and one of the first tragedies. Because, In addition to the tangible loss, a more subtle and lethal wound was starting to show. The isolation of a lady who isn't allowed to mature. Hayley Mills didn't simply give up her status as a childhood legend after leaving Disney. She started a quest to reinvent herself in her personal life as well as on television. And she made love her first decision. At the age of 20, Hayley Mills accepted a position that would take her career and her life in a completely different direction. Regardless of the reaction of others, the gap in age, or the fury of people who formerly viewed her as a moral ideal. The 1966 comedy drama, The Family Way, told the story of a young couple who were having difficulties on their wedding night. There was a startling scene in what appeared to be a nice screenplay. Once the adored Pollyanna, Hayley might be seen on camera completely nude. She didn't make a gratuitous or sexualized naked scene. However, it felt like a smack in the face to the nation's beloved romantic image to viewers at the time, particularly Disney lovers. But for Hayley, it was the beginning of a new self. But it was the difference between the person I wanted to be and the child others had made me. As she said in her memoir, Forever Young, for the first time in my overly protected life, I took off all my clothes in front of the camera. It was strange, scary, almost comical. And she met Roy Bolting, the man who would transform her life during that movie. The 52-year-old director of the movie is already married, has 3 marriages with 6 children, and has a history of complex relationships. Hayley Mills was only 32 years older than Roy Bolting. She was younger than his 2 elder sons. The relationship was scandalous by all moral standards. Hayley Mills, however, was unconcerned. I wasn't forced. I wasn't a victim. I cherished him. Later, in an interview, she said, the night before The Family Ways premiere, the affair started. They walked around Trafalgar Square, the shopping center, and the route that led to Buckingham Palace after seeing the movie together. Roy turned and kissed her at a crosswalk. We slept together that night, Hayley had remembered. Hayley kept it a secret from her parents until 1967, when they returned from America and she met them at the Heathrow airport. I loved him. I didn't care how much older he was. She then openly lived with a man old enough to be her father, defying public outrage and media condemnation. So, you've slept with him? Her mother, Mary Hayley Bell, questioned icily, while her father, Sir John Mills, was so astonished that he fell to the ground. Her memoir describes their reaction as both tragic and darkly humorous. After a lengthy quiet, her father stumbled. You know, Roy will be 72 when you're 40, but Hayley refused to lie and nodded. After living together as husband and wife for a number of years before being legally married in 1971, she calmly responded, "Then I'll push him along the beach in a wheelchair." Her response became widely publicized and a symbol of the deliberate rebellion of a woman who had been subjected to constant control throughout her youth. Hayley Mills continued to act in Roy's films, including Mr. Forbush and The Penguins and The Kingfisher Caper, but none of them had much of an impact. A year later, she gave birth to their first son, Crispian Mills, who would go on to become the lead singer of the band Kula Shaker. She later acknowledged, "I gave up my image, my career, and even my relationship with my parents to love him." What had started out as a liberating love quickly became a dark prison as Roy became possessive, domineering, and domineering, and an unbridgeable generational difference overshadowed their home life. However, It is difficult to love a man who has lived 3 lifetimes before you. They got divorced in 1977. Nevertheless, Hayley never apologized. That friendship, she said, was an essential step. To live as a woman with the right to love, to fail, and to pay the price, and to escape the shell Disney had placed around her. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was making the decisions, even though they would laugh at me. The Golden Girl image Disney had painstakingly built over years was shattered by the Roy Bolting affair. But it also gave Hayley Mills the opportunity to finally escape the glass cage, not as a bright Pollyanna in front of the camera, but as a woman figuring out how to navigate the rough terrain of pain, public criticism, and the desire for autonomy. And that was a win in its own right. Hayley Mills began a tumultuous chapter after her divorce from Roy Bolting in 1977. It wasn't as scandalous or newsworthy as her notorious first love, but it was characterized by the quiet weariness and disillusionment of a woman who once thought that love could save everything. Roy Bolting had served as more than just a spouse. He served as her teacher, career mentor, and a representation of her breaking free from the Disney cage. However, after that marriage ended, there was a huge emotional and professional vacuum. Hayley Mills, an actress in her early 30s, was a single mother attempting to maintain a career that was rapidly waning. She, again, went to a fellow actress in her loneliness. Hayley starred in Endless Night, 1972, a dark psychological thriller based on an Agatha Christie book. Shortly after splitting from Roy, she got to know her co-star, the dashing and reflective British actor Hyle Bennett. They fell in love right away, this time with a person of her own age who worked in the same field and was of the same generation. However, despite being less closely examined, the connection ended. They were both looking for a career path. Both had past injuries, and neither was secure enough to establish a long-term residence. Silently, they parted ways. Just two people who had met at an odd turning point in their lives and then went their separate ways. No scandal, no public repercussions. Hayley Mills found some stability with Lee Lawson, a lesser-known British actor with a kind, considerate disposition after Hyle Bennett. They lived together as partners for many years while never getting married. Hayley gave birth to Jason Lawson, their son, in 1976. She took a break from the limelight at this period to concentrate on becoming a mother, making sporadic appearances on television in bit parts or short plays. According to Mills, Lee was a patient friend, a loving father, and she never felt forced to get back to her best. But slowly, their divergent perspectives on life emerged. They parted ways amicably in the beginning of the 1980s. No litigation, no custody disputes. However, it was Hayley's second time becoming a single mother, which is a challenging situation for someone who once represented the world's collective childhood. The enduring sense that she was always the one left to deal with the fallout from loving too deeply was the source of the greatest suffering. Not the breakups per se. I've never been able to distinguish between a genuine basis and infatuation. In a rare interview, she revealed, "I love without hesitation, and sometimes it takes me years to get over my feelings." Hayley Mills' private life had become more subdued by the 1990s. In 1997, however, a fresh door opened in a very different manner. She met 20-year-old Indian-American writer and actress Ferda Bamji. Ferda was the one who helped her see that age is simply a number, even though Roy Bolting had previously caused a media frenzy with their age difference. However, no declarations were required this time. No controversy, No magazine covers. No wedding, just a calm, long-lasting relationship with a man who didn't need her to play a part or try to dominate her that lasted more than 20 years. They shared a home, went on walks, read books, and occasionally made an appearance at tiny art events. Despite not being well known, Bamji had a similar creative spirit to her. I always listened without imposing, as Hayley put it. I've loved older men. I've loved men my age. But only by loving someone younger did I finally learn not to hide anything. She smiled softly when asked about the age gap. Ferda Bamji was the love of peace, if Roy Bolting was the love of revolt, High Will Bennett the love of creative kinship, and Lee Lawson the love of gentleness. Following all the setbacks, defeats, and altercations, Hayley Mills no longer needed to establish her identity, participate in any activity, or regain her freedom of choice, because she already had it this time. And for a lady who lived her whole life playing parts that were written for her by others, that is the most priceless present. In a world where all decisions were previously made for her, Hayley Mills used love, both its right and wrong turns, to rewrite her own tale. And that's the most exquisite triumph any woman who was previously considered public property could possibly achieve. For Hayley Mills, love, whether intense or gentle, was never a pan. She believed she had learned to listen to herself after having relationships that were both deep and damaged. However, few people were aware of the grief and physical damage that a part of her had been neglecting for years. Hayley came to the realization that she had been policing herself more severely than anybody else when her profession was free from outside influence and love no longer dictated its own term. And it all started when she was Disney's golden girl, always glowing on screen and acclaimed for being beauty, charm, and light as a feather during what seemed to be her most illustrious years. She was afraid that if she lost it, she would lose herself completely because she knew that others adored her for the way she looked. Her silent struggle with an eating disorder started at that point. She wasn't coerced. Nobody took notice. However, the public's beloved image turned into an unseen chain that imprisoned her in a real prison from which she could not free herself. Nobody else's adolescence was like Hayley Mills. She was the face of a movie empire when other females were only starting to discover who they were. She had to maintain her small shape, neat hair, and immaculately ironed outfit when her contemporaries were free to rebel. A minor weight increase, a blemish, or an ugly snapshot could all be perceived as signs that she is past her prime. They adored me because I was gentle and innocent, she stated in Forever Young, and I was afraid that I wouldn't be chosen if I didn't look light anymore. A casual conversation was the spark. Hayley once talked to a famous writer who admitted that he ate grass after meals to induce vomiting and keep himself light for races. As a teenager already struggling to preserve her body image, that odd realization plagued her. As a kind of self-punishment, Hayley began binging and then purging as soon as she was diagnosed with bulimia. It initially provided solace, as if it were a means of erasing the guilt associated with eating. However, the repercussions soon followed. Hormonal abnormalities, brittle hair, gray skin, severe acne, missed periods, and emotional instability. Nobody was aware. Nobody got it. Furthermore, she was unaware of her illness. I believed I had created it. I was unaware of its name. I didn't believe it had the potential to kill you. Hayley kept all the warning indicators hidden for years. Her parents didn't know. Her companions had no suspicions. She continued to receive plaudits from the media for her inherent attractiveness. Behind closed doors, however, each bathroom exit left her feeling even more exhausted. Hayley didn't realize she wasn't alone until bulimia was officially recognized by the medical community and eating disorders were discussed in public. Throughout her childhood, she had been suffering from a type of silent, chronic depression. She discusses what she refers to as the trap of perfection in Forever Young for a number of chapters. A society that idolizes children while denying them the freedom to grow, make mistakes, or even breathe. Neither a lost fortune nor a sensational affair was the worst wound for Mills. It was the ongoing rejection of her basic human rights. On the red carpet, every smile was planned. Weighing in was a struggle every time. I was worn out from having to be loved all the time. When Mills recovered, he decided not to keep quiet. She started voicing her opinions on mental health, the demands placed on celebrities' bodies, and the value of removing the taboo around these topics. She openly discussed her story, participated in eating disorder awareness initiatives, and repeatedly emphasized that, if left untreated, what Hollywood lauded in a 14-year-old might ruin you by 24. People are starting to realize that Hayley Mills was fighting this battle in the 1960s, before anyone had the vocabulary to call it that. As many young female artists now publicly discuss the negative media portrayals of their waiter appearance. The fact that she lived and had the guts to speak up so that others wouldn't have to remain silent like she did is arguably what makes her most admirable, not the juvenile Oscar or her status as a Disney princess. Hayley Mills, who is almost 80 years old, is no longer the young woman who used to make America stop every Sunday night in front of the television. The woman who lived under the spotlight for almost her whole childhood is now living more brilliantly than ever, without cameras, without applause, and without the need for an audience. So anyone who believes she has sunk into obscurity would be mistaken. Hayley Mills never made a formal retirement announcement. She's still on the screen. Not frequently or loudly, but just enough to demonstrate that when her heart still has something to say, she still turns to art. In contrast to her previous Disney roles, she played a kind but tough grandmother in the 2019 season of Pitching In, a pleasant family drama series on Acorn TV. Although it wasn't a noteworthy comeback, it was sufficient for her. In 2023-2024, Hayley Mills was still performing at the age of 77-78. She joined the cast of The Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime and starred in the critically acclaimed ITV series Unforgotten, demonstrating that you can embrace your art with the freedom that youth never permitted when you are not under pressure to maintain an image. Not to hold on to, Hayley released her memoir, Forever Young, in 2021, The Limelight, but to describe how she overcame a role that she had played for 50 years. She candidly addresses subjects that were previously regarded as taboo in the book. Her bulimia, parental trauma, Disney's domineering influence, her liaison with a married man, and the devastating loss of her youthful wealth due to a 91% tax rate. It is not an apology book. It's not bitter. Like Hayley herself, it is revealing, kind, truthful, occasionally funny, and occasionally painful. At one point, I was Pollyanna, the optimistic girl. However, I'm also Hayley, the woman who discovered that in order to live authentically with your pain, you occasionally need to let go of artificial optimism. However, the actual Hayley Mills is much more memorable. Before she ever realized what she wanted, a girl had control, who, after losing everything, dared to sue the government, endure scandal, endure bulimia, love a man old enough to be her father, and finally let go of all in order to preserve her voice and dignity. Not all kid stars make it through adulthood. After the lights go dark, not everyone who wants praise can make it. Hayley Mills, however, did, because of the calm fortitude of a woman who refused to be confined, not because of Disney enchantment. People may still be struck by the innocence and whistle down the wind, grin at the naughty girl in the Parent Trap, or cry at the optimistic eyes in Pollyanna when they watch those classic movies nowadays. However, there is a path of strength and grief behind those positions, that the only people who can really comprehend it are those who are prepared to look past the screen. Legendary status was never necessary for Hayley Mills. With her grin, her scars, and the stories no one wrote for her, she just needed to be authentic. And maybe that's why she's survived every brief moment of fame. How about you? Did Pollyanna grow up with you? Do you wish you were in the Parent Trap as one half of the twins? Or thought Hayley Mills was the girl who never experienced sorrow? What remains most with you after all of this? A lesson learnt, one of her responsibilities, or the sheer courage to confront sorrow head on? Leave a comment below with your opinions. Additionally, if you think Hayley Mills' story should be told, please share this video, subscribe to the channel, and remember to hit the bell so you don't miss any more inspiring tales of your favorite legends. We appreciate you being with us until the conclusion of this trip. And keep in mind that, like Hayley, you only need to be honest. You don't need to be flawless.